Dzień dobry. Jestem Sergeant Jason Smith. Odpowiedzialny za ciebie. Nie mówię po polsku zbyt dobrze, zadzwonię po tłumacza. Rozumiem, tak? What the heck am I talking about? What the heck am I talking about? 33 years in 31 days. What are we? Day 19, looking at 2008. Good evening, folks. Welcome along. There's lots of, what? Coming in the comments there. Understood loud and clear. Laura, wow. Always a bit. Some of you may have understood what I said. Some of you may not. Some of you may have caught the odd word or whatever. You'll know that I'm in custody. You'll know that I've been working in custody since 2006, and that I've been dealing with all sorts of people coming through the doors. But one of the things that I started to do was that, or started to notice, was that we were getting quite a number of people through the door who were Polish. And so I started to take it upon myself. We had a really good relationship with a lot of the interpreters. And I took it upon myself to start trying to learn some very basic phrases in Polish. Probably stems from the fact that whenever I've been abroad, and I'm not hugely widely traveled, but whenever I've been abroad, I've always made it my business to at least be able to say hello, goodbye, please, and thank you in the home language, because it really, really does make a difference. And so I thought, well, I can try and learn a little bit of Polish. So, dzień dobry, which is bonjour, good day, good morning, hello, and what have you. And do widzenia, we'll see you, and what have you. So I started to pick up a little bit of the lingo, and I'd check it with the interpreters. I wouldn't know how to write it down. I wouldn't know how to spell it. And I only wrote it down phonetically so I could actually say it. So you can imagine dzień dobry, Jen space Dobry, dzień dobry. It's not spelt like that at all, but it would allow me to understand what it was. So what did I say? Well, dzień dobry, good morning, hello. I'm sure there's probably an alternate for good evening or bonsoir in French and so on. But dzień dobry, good evening. Jestem Sergeant Jason Smith. I am Sergeant Jason Smith. Odpowiedzialny za ciebie. I'm responsible for you whilst you're here. Nie mówię po polsku zbyt dobrze. I do not speak Polish very well. Zadzwonię po tłumacza. I will call an interpreter. Rozumiem? Understand? Question mark. Tak? Yes? That was the basis of one of my opening lines if somebody came in that was Polish. A lot of the time they spoke reasonably good English, but occasionally you get someone who had no English at all, or was being deliberately obstructive and saying, no English. And yet the Bobby will say, they've been speaking English all the way here in the van, complaining about why they've been arrested. But it certainly makes a difference. And there were those who welcomed it and like, wonderful. And those who sort of denied my words at all and looked at me as though say, I don't understand. And you're like, well, hang on a minute. The interpreters have been spoken to. The interpreters have talked to me about it and have said, that's absolutely fine. And your pronunciation is actually really quite good for Polish. You think, well, that's a boon. So you know that you're speaking Polish. You know that you're speaking something that somebody from Poland will understand, even if it's not massively accurately grammatically correct. But they'd understand it. And some would welcome it. But then, despite the fact that you've just said, I don't speak Polish very well and I'm going to ring an interpreter for you, they then go, blah, 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 and they're under pressure and they've been arrested and they want to know what's happening. Like, whoa, nie mówię po polsku zbyt dobrze. I don't speak it very well or at all, you know. So that was always interesting, and used to always use a little bit of language where I could. And much better than, you know, looking for somebody who speaks German and having sort of like Blackadder type sort of sketches. What is your name? You know. That was one of the things that I used to do. I also did a little bit of Romanian, but not a lot. It was very much restricted to hello and goodbye. I did much more with Polish. As you know, yesterday we were talking about the custody sergeant's course and how all that played up. Eventually, they sent me on the 1 week refresher course to Hutton Hall at Lancashire, which is Lancashire Constabulary's training facility. So a different experience to go to another force and go to their training venue, which was quite pleasant and different. It turned out not to be residential, so we had to commute every day up the M6 and back. Some of the bobbies do, but we've also picked up bobbies over the years that actually are Polish and have been massive assets within the organisation with their multiple language skills. But up and down the M6 every day, went to the course, did the course for custody. Much better, because they weren't teaching me how to do things that I'd been doing for 14 months, 15 months. They were just refreshing on latest legislation and stuff. The one thing that was really obvious, talking to the custody sergeants from Lancashire and the way that they managed their custody systems, we had one system that did everything, and they had like 3 and 4 different systems that were doing different things. They were massively behind from a technology perspective. And when we said our jailers can go onto the custody record whiteboard on the computer, and if they've got 30 people in the cells and 25 of them are asleep and perfectly well, they can highlight all 25 of them at once and then go click, add entry, visited safe and well, blah, 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 bleeding naturally, boom. And it puts 25 entries on 25 custody records like that. And they were like, you can do that. We have to do it individually, every single one. And they were way behind. But that was done. The next thing, and the only other thing that I'm going to discuss, which was what I mentioned last night, and I put it out in a tweet a little while ago as well, was that as a custody sergeant, you are not there to keep the cops happy, and you are not there to keep the prisoners happy with regard to the decisions that you make. The decisions that you make have to be based in evidence, have to be based in facts, and have to be right for law. Do we get it right all the time? No, do we? Heck. But we make decisions based on what we know, and then it's to be tested. If it's going to go to court, it's tested in the courts. That's how it works. But occasionally we make decisions that don't make the prisoners happy. You know, right, okay, bring out number 12. Number 12 comes to the desk. All right, John or Sarah or whoever it happens to be, I've had a chat with the officer, I've reviewed all the evidence in the case. I believe that there's sufficient evidence to charge with this offence, and we're going to do that, blah, 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 blah. Or it's gone to the CPS and they've authorised the charge, so you're going to be charged with this offence. Oh, right, okay, so you charge them with the offence. Now the decision sits with me as to whether or not I'm going to grant you bail or not. Boom, I'm not. You're making decisions that aren't going to make people happy. You're charging people instead of giving them a caution. They're not happy, and so on and so on and so on. But occasionally, and I have to say that I went through my career with very, very, very few complaints. And when I went into custody, I got complaints left, right, and centre, because there's just a propensity, because of the environment and the way that it is, that people feel as though they're having a disservice done to them. And the beauty of the Middlewich Custody Suite was that everything everywhere was video recorded and audio recorded. So you get people who ring up and say, they write letters in saying, I was denied a solicitor and I wasn't given my rights and I wasn't doing this and I had this property taken off me that was never returned and da-da-da. And the video footage goes, would you like a solicitor? No. Sign there. Signed. It used to blow a lot of complaints out of the water. But I got more complaints in custody. Not oodles, but I got more complaints in custody than I ever had at any other point in my career, because it's just that kind of environment where people complain about you. But the complaints don't always come from the public and the people that have been brought into custody. They sometimes come from the cops themselves, because, as I said, you're making decisions based on evidence and fact and law, not sympathetic to one side or another. You have to be impartial, right in the middle. There was an occasion where a young lad came in for a public order offence, and for breaching like a dispersal notice where he'd been told to leave the town by a certain time and he hadn't left the town and he got arrested. Clearly, the local cops had had enough of him. Clearly, there was some history of having problems with this person before. And it turned out that he got locked up, he came into custody, and he was the son of a serving officer. So he got booked in, got sorted out, everything else. And to cut a very, very long story short, after a great deal of inquiries and an awful lot of looking into the matters, I decided there was insufficient evidence and I kicked him out straight away. So he'd been in custody about 2 hours and I kicked him out. Said, insufficient evidence, no further action, gone. The officers that had arrested this person complained to their sergeant that their prisoner had been let go, who complained to their inspector that the prisoner that their officers had arrested had been let go. And what followed was a huge investigation into the decision process that I'd gone through and how I'd come to my conclusion. It was investigated by professional standards because it was deemed that potentially I'd done something seriously wrong and shown favoritism towards the son of a serving officer. On the investigation it went on and on and on. I stood my ground. They pulled me to pieces for ringing and speaking to the father of the detainee on the telephone whilst he was in custody, despite the fact that he's entitled to have somebody notified of his arrest, and it was his father that they'd asked to have. It was his father that he'd asked to be notified of the arrest. So why wouldn't I spend some time on the phone speaking to him, because I'm telling his father that his son has been arrested? The conversation in the custody suite while we were discussing with the other sergeants what I was going to do and what I thought and how I felt about it, we talked about his father. They picked it up on the CCTV that I said, he's a nice fella, got a lot of time for him. Totally innocuous. He is a nice fella, and I did have a lot of time for him. But if his son was guilty of something, it was going to be processed. But they didn't like that either. And it went on, and it went on, and it went on. Huge, long-winded report was produced by professional standards, where it was about 6, 7, 8 pages long, going across the circumstances and everything that had gone on. And when you got to the end of it, you thought, I can't see that they've actually picked up on anything there that they can criticize me for. They might not like my decision, but it's my decision. And whether they like it or not is irrelevant. Is it an unlawful decision? Was there something wrong with my actions? No. So if you don't like my decision, tough. I ended up in being called to a meeting with a representative from Professional Standards, and my inspector came with me, who we sat in the room, and the chap from Professional Standards sat there and said, right, we've done an investigation and we can't say that we found that you've done anything wrong. He then spent the next 15 minutes talking through all the reasons why they thought my decision was inappropriate, all the reasons why they thought if it hit the front page of the Daily Mail, how it might be perceived, public perception might not be best ever if it was established that the police had let a police officer's son go. And I looked and listened to it all and didn't say a word. And he said, so we're offering you words of advice on this because we can't find that you've done anything wrong, and we're offering you words of advice, which is a standard closure for a lot of professional standards matters, where they say we've spoken to the officer and given words of advice. And I just sat there silently and listened to it all. And when he'd finished, I said, is that it? You finished? Yes. I'm not accepting your words of advice. His face was a picture. The inspector started to sort of squirm in his chair and get uncomfortable. I said, I am not accepting your words of advice. You have said right at the very beginning that you've investigated this matter and found no fault or wrongdoing. There is nothing to challenge me on. So what exactly are you advising me on? You're advising me on something because you don't like my decision, and that's irrelevant. I'm not accepting your words of advice. Put it on your report if you like, but I'm not accepting it. Oh, Professional Standards person got very agitated and and the inspector intervened at one point, but I just said, I will not accept words of advice for something. It's like having no evidence to say that somebody was speeding, but pulling them over anyway and saying, you were speeding. Well, no, it wasn't actually, officer. I was doing 28. Oh, right. Well, if you were speeding, don't do it. But I wasn't speeding, officer. You know what I mean? You see where I'm coming from? So exactly, Jenny. Stood my ground because I thought, I'm not having somebody give me words of advice about something where they can't prove that what they're advising me on. You've not done anything wrong. So we're advising you that had you done something wrong, we might have been able to do something about it. Bonkers. Went on for ages. Dragged on for ages. The officer in question is a lovely fella. Got a lot of time for him, as I said. But as you know, I got commended once in my service, and it was because I went and stood and had the bottle to go and stand up in front of a discipline hearing and give evidence against other officers for something that I believed that I'd seen and heard. And I was commended for the bravery of coming forward and saying that. I've stood on my principles right throughout my career for doing what's right, not showing favoritism or anything because it's somebody that I know or whatever. Because I don't want to jeopardize my career, I don't want to jeopardize my pension, and I don't want to jeopardize the trust of my friends and my family who believe I'm out there doing great work. Why am I going to do that for somebody who can't behave? But based on the evidence and everything that I'd got, the offence wasn't made out as the arresting officers had put it forward. So I got rid of it. But then I got, but you could have done this, or you could have done that, or you might have thought about that. Yeah, but if you read the great big long entry that I've put on the custody record justifying why I'm not taking the decision, you'll know that I've already covered those angles and decided that they're not relevant either. So there we go. It was a really difficult situation, but I actually sort of, in the back of my mind, had a certain amount of pleasure in sitting there and telling the person from Professional Standards that I wasn't accepting their words of advice because they just didn't know what to do with themselves. In most cases, you get words of advice and you go, all right, thanks very much, and walk out. But I actually threw it back and said, no, I'm not accepting it. Nothing ever came of it. And I think the inspector was glad to get out of the room, who's now a superintendent and doing very well for himself. But anyway, there we go. That's all. 2008, 33 years in 31 days. Tomorrow we'll look at 2009. I'm going to talk about a kid tomorrow. I've got her actual name is actually written on my notes here, but I'll have to use another name, or at least I'm not going to give a full name. But some of the experiences that we have with kids in custody and stuff like that, I'll see what else I can come up with. Otherwise, it's quite a small entry for tomorrow. But day 20, 2009. Thanks for dropping in. It was difficult, Jenny. Thank you. But yeah, that's what policing is about. It's about challenge, and it's about standing by your principles and standing by your beliefs and justifying what you do. And if you do that, no matter what, if they don't like what you've done, it's completely irrelevant. I don't care whether you like what I've done or whether you agree with my decision or not. If you choose to disagree with me, disagree with me. If I've done something against the rules and the regulations and the code of conduct and the rest of it, fine, come after me. But if you just don't like my decision and you feel that in order to put a tick in a box and show that you've dealt with a matter, you can say, officer given words of advice. I'm not playing party to that at all. Not playing. So yeah, stood my ground. Anyway, that's all for tonight. Hope to see you tomorrow on day 20, looking at 2009, getting closer and closer to joining social media. And we'll see you then. Wherever you are, take care. Have a wonderful, pardon me, have a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Good night.